Yep, looks good.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Ohio Stormwater Association webinar series. Uh, Today's topic is utility scale solar site construction, stormwater management with our guest speaker, Barry Fagan. Let me just quickly go over OSWA a little bit. We're dedicated to advancing the management of stormwater and related natural resources through education, leadership, watershed-based coordination, and technical assistance in Ohio. We are a non-profit, non-political entity made up of a diverse group of uh, consultants, municipal employees. I'm Dave Reuter with Franklin Soil and Water. I'm also a board member. and chair of the regulatory committee as well. If you're looking to, we are a division of WAMO, so if you're looking to renew your membership or you want to join OSWA, be sure you're circling the Ohio Stormwater Association affiliation if you want to get the benefits of our content and professional groups. Also, be sure to check your area of interest for stormwater. And then get involved. We have several committees within Ohio Stormwater Association. We have education, marketing, regulatory. We just sat an industrial stormwater chair, and we're looking for a chair for the extreme weather resiliency committee as well. So if you have those interests, feel free to contact any of us board members for that. So today's agenda, we've got Barry Fagan. He's a professional engineer with Volkert, Vice President of the Environment and Infrastructure Group. And we look forward to your talk today. We've had a lot of interest in solar installations around Ohio recently, and we'll get into that here shortly. As far as Q&A goes, please use the chat box. If you want to post questions, we'll have an opportunity at the end of Barry's presentation to go over that, and we'll have those at the end of the presentation. With that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Barry. And it's all yours, Barry. You can take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dave. And hello, everyone. I'm Barry. I'm with Volkert. And in case you don't know Volkert yet, we're a multidiscipline engineering and consulting firm that's really been supporting infrastructure solutions and delivering those for almost 100 years now. We're based out of Alabama, where I live and where I'm delivering this from today, but we have offices from Texas to Ohio to New Jersey, down the East Coast to Southern Florida, and everywhere in between. As Dave mentioned, I lead a group of environmental planners and environmental designers and environmental permitting and compliance professionals. And we work at the intersection of natural and built environments. And that's a place of potential conflict, but we're finding ways to have those two areas kind of complement one another. When built environment runs into natural environment or the other way around, we see that as a benefit, not necessarily a conflict. So I'm a stormwater guy. I'm a stormwater nerd, maybe like some of you are. I've also found myself in some weird places over the last 5 years, maybe like you have. I've done stormwater related work for the Ohio DOT and in Nevada and Colorado. I've worked for the Ohio DOT there. Currently, I'm working for the Nebraska DOT and Mississippi DOT and Alabama DOT. State, city, county, parish, private development. I get a good taste of all of that. I mentioned working there in Ohio. All of my experiences in Ohio have been positive. Dave reminded me of I can't remember, a symposium of sorts at the DOT several years ago. I've also been to your stormwater conference, and I think we have a lot of things in common, or I seem to find those between our two states, Ohio and Alabama. And I guess the most obvious one is high quality college football. Any Alabama fans out there? Yeah, me neither. I'm an Auburn fan and an Auburn graduate, and so that's one more thing that we have in common there. But while we're here today is the commonality we have with being fairly new to utility scale solar facilities. Here in Alabama, maybe the last 6 years or so, and it's emerging there in Ohio now. And me personally, I'm fairly new to this type of development. But I think the experiences that I've had so far, they've certainly been meaningful and valuable to me, and I'm happy and really appreciate the Stormwater Association for inviting me to share those experiences with you. And I hope that they'll be, I think they'll be helpful as you start to get into that world also. I used to work with the Alabama DOT. I worked there for 26 years and retired in 2016. And the most of that was in construction, or maybe half of it, more than half. And then the last part of my career, I dealt with, I helped to lead our stormwater programs and the environmental program for ALDOT. And I became that guy who was assigned those jobs that no one else wanted to do, particularly going to meet with angry landowners. So our neighbors would have a complaint about sediment in their pond or their dam being blown out as a result of the new roadway, and Barry was asked to go out and kind of make that situation better. And while personally I run from conflict pretty quickly, I don't mind getting into a situation where I think I might be able to make things better, or at least help to make things better. And so that reputation, I guess, followed me beyond ALDOT. And my first solar experience was getting a call from a developer based out of Idaho about a job in Alabama. And he said, "Hey, we're in trouble. Can you help?" And so it has been one client and one project after another with kind of a similar start. I have tried to convince our clients that if they'll hire us on the front end, I think we can save them some money on the back end. And actually a few have started to do that. And so I'll share with you my experiences and my perspective on construction stormwater management, just in general, and at solar facilities, and share with you some approaches that I've taken over the last 15 years that I think will help to make you more successful in managing stormwater on your sites. So before we get into that, let's talk just a little bit about solar in general. So the U.S. is a leader in contributing energy that was created from the sun, and we're ranked third in the world, I believe. Renewable energy last year contributed about 20% of our overall energy use in the U.S., with wind energy making up about half of that. Next year, it's expected that solar will exceed wind energy in production. So all forms of renewable energy are growing. Solar just happens to be growing more quickly than the other. And if we look at a map of the United States, it's pretty obvious to me where solar ought to be. I immediately think about sunny, dry, flat places, and the desert Southwest and West Texas. That makes sense to me. Even Florida, I think about sunshine and beaches and Disney World, and that makes sense if you can find the room. What's a little more surprising to me are those northeastern states and the upper Midwestern states. It's probably a misperception, but I don't immediately think about sunshine when I think about those places. But here recently, it was announced that that work is starting on a 13,000-acre solar site in northern Indiana, your neighbor, and that's huge. That'll be the largest in the U.S. And one of my coworkers there in Indiana told me yesterday that she heard that there would be a 14,000-acre site coming to Wisconsin soon, and so that's pretty big in scale and a little bit surprising to me. But if it can be done in Wisconsin and Indiana, of course, it can be done in Ohio. And so as I was doing research for this talk back in August, I could only find 2 utility scale facilities in Ohio. There may be others, but that was all I found. But I did stumble on this map and learned that there were over 40 applications for utility scale developments that had been filed with the Ohio Power Siting Board. So definitely solar is coming. It's there, and it's coming, and it's growing. I actually shared the flyer for this webinar with one of my solar contractor contacts, and he emailed back. He said, "This is great. Ohio is one of our strategic markets for the year 2022. So So they're headed your way. And I think it's really smart on Teresa and the folks there in the Dayton area. They see this wave coming. We're all stormwater professionals, and we understand that if you build anything on 14 or 13,000 acres of land, even 1,000 acres of land, you better be on your game there in Ohio. And so I appreciate the association taking this topic and wanting to dig a little bit more deeply into it, just to prepare for the future. So what's driving solar? Obviously, there's an environmental benefit, especially if you compare solar energy to the burning of fossil fuels to get electricity. There's some obvious benefits there. The statistics are a little bit hard for me to wrap my mind around. I don't know what a metric ton of carbon dioxide looks like, but I do know that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. And I know that we are already experiencing the effects of climate change in the form of increased storm intensity and increased frequency of storms and the depth of rainfall that we're receiving. And so that's for us, that's you and I as stormwater professionals to deal with. You know, if we're not addressing stormwater and how to deal with it once it hits the ground, then who is? So that's kind of the connection for me. But the growth isn't all about the environment. It's about money, like a lot of things. And so there are different types of investment into solar. And of course, there's just the branding benefits for companies. You can see Goldman Sachs there. They've decided to invest in sustainable things, and they're hoping that their demonstrated corporate values line up with my corporate values and your corporate values, to the extent that we would send them our money to invest in those things. Same thing with BlackRock investment. But we're also seeing entities like Facebook and Google and Amazon, those entities that use a lot of electricity. They're seeing operational costs decrease when they get that electricity from a solar producing facility. And then I guess another type of investment into solar, a lot of the clients that I work for are investors. They put their money on the line to construct a solar facility in the hopes of selling that facility and getting a good return on their money, or hanging on to that facility and then selling the power or electricity from it in the future to get their return on their money. And while those clients, I enjoy those clients actually, and they're money people, they're accountants, and they're finance people, and they're attorneys. And it's sometimes odd to see them sloshing around in the mud with me out on a site. And sometimes they get our terminology tripped up a little bit, but they're very quick to learn about our world of managing construction stormwater, because they literally have a vested interest in it. You know, if construction stormwater is costing unnecessarily or unexpected amounts of money, then they need to know about that, and they're very interested in our world. And so if you were investing in a solar site, where would you put it? You know, I mentioned some of those obvious states. That's where I would go first, and mainly because I know that you need sunlight to produce solar energy. One thing I hadn't quite thought through is you also need a connection to the energy grid. And the energy grid doesn't work exactly like I thought either. You need to be close to it and have a connection. But I guess over the years, thinking back on my physics teacher in high school, he taught us that if you put an electron into one end of a wire, and one electron would pop out on the other, kind of like a garden hose with marbles in it, I think is the way he described it. And so I just assumed that if you stuck an electron in Los Angeles, one would pop out in New York. Well, that's oversimplifies and doesn't work. There are inefficiencies, and our grid isn't as connected as I thought. And I was reminded of that this past winter when Texas's grid went down. No one could help them because it's Texas's grid. They're all isolated there on their own. And I remember a solar developer, when I first started, I said, "So what, did y'all run out of room in the desert?" And he said, "Well, here's the bottom line. You need electricity here and we don't have an extension cord long enough. And that made sense to me. And so we need those two things, and we need land. 13,000 acres of land is a lot of land. You don't have to have that much. The facilities I've worked on have ranged from 800 acres to 1,600 acres, which is huge. I worked on a 1,000-acre site that I think there were 360,000 panels, just to give you some idea of how many solar panels there are. But it makes sense that as costs of materials go down, and as the efficiency of these facilities goes up, just from technological advances, more land, more profit, or more panels equals more land equals more profit. So it makes sense that they would get bigger and bigger. But that's an issue for some people, and I get it. When a solar facility comes to town, not everyone is excited about it. And I guess some of those chief complaints about solar are they take up usable land, or land that could be used for agricultural production. And there's an element of habitat removal. There are no trees on a solar site. And so things that live in and benefit from trees, that's also a negative there. And I get it. My dad grew up on a farm, and he has a hard time accepting solar because, in his mind, the land needs to be productive, and it needs to be productive in an agricultural way. But I also think there's I know there's also a political element to that, that is within him and others. I noticed Teresa sent me a copy of the Ohio Senate Bill 52, which is not about promoting wind energy or solar energy, but it is only about wind and solar. But it gives local communities the ability and the authority and a mechanism for saying, not in my backyard. We don't, if a county decides that they don't want solar or wind, then they can prohibit those types of developments within their county. It doesn't say anything about mining or oil exploration or chicken houses, but it does talk about solar. And we see those types of laws, well, I guess every state, and including Alabama, and we may be better at it than most. But when I see that type of law, it makes me cringe just a little bit. I don't like to see us lock ourselves down, especially when I think the source may be coming from fear or a lack of information, or maybe misinformation. Good old-fashioned politics sometimes play a part. And I'm not saying that's what's behind Senate Bill 52, but it looked familiar, and I just hate to see us lock things down like that. So looking at the land, you can tell by this photograph that this solar facility is not in Ohio or Alabama or anywhere in between. And I could have photoshopped the vegetation beyond the site, and you would still say, we can't build something that big and that flat that's rectangular in our part of the country. Our solar sites look something like this. They have irregular edges, and they're broken up. And the fact is, we have streams and wetlands and hills and hollows, and you just can't build a big old square flat thing out there where we are. And this photograph was taken in June. It's a Google Earth image taken in June. In June in the southeast, everything is lush and green, and you can see around the border of the photo there, everything is lush and green except for under the panels, and that orange color is southeastern red clay. And so when I first drove up on this site, I walked up to the project trailer, and I noticed the welcome mat where you wipe your feet was stained orange. And then I walked in, and the floors were orange, and the walls were orange, and every piece of paper hanging on the bulletin boards was orange. And it's obvious there's no vegetation on this site, hardly to speak of. And that was, I met the owner of the development company that day, and I said, look, the first thing you got to do is cover this place up with something. I don't care what it is, cover this place up. And so it was at a season where permanent vegetation can't be established. So temporary vegetation got us to this state by March of the next year. So I got involved in November And then by March, we had it looking a little bit better, a little more stabilized, but this was just so we could start fixing some of the problems on this site. I wasn't involved in construction. I came in toward the end, and as I was wrapping my work up, of course, the contractor and developer were having conversations about who's going to pay for this cleanup. They'd spent millions of dollars to get the site just back into regulatory compliance, and now it was time to decide who's going to pay. And I noticed that the contractor's representative, he said, "Now, Bob, you know good and well that it was a joint decision to eliminate vegetation from the contract. Y'all were going to do that later." And so that the owner's representative, he was asking me afterward what I thought about that conversation. I said, well, the good news is it was a joint decision. The bad news is it was a terrible decision to eliminate vegetation. Now both of you are going to have to share in these millions of dollars worth of costs that it's taken to get back to where it is. And you as the owner, you're going to be dealing with these issues for years to come. And so it was a shame. And by the way, Bob wasn't his real name. I'm going to have to, or I will, protect the innocent and the guilty out of consideration for the good people that I work with, but also I'm under a non-disclosure agreement with all of these sites that you'll see photos of. So if I'm a little vague on some details, thank you for that understanding. So I have found that many of the solar development firms, the individuals, the people that work for them, they have a pretty solid environmental ethic, and they're really bothered when their sites don't reflect that personal brand and those personal values. And it also seems to be true of environmental regulators and water advocates. I remember a river keeper that we were dealing with a couple of years ago. They were really torn by having to turn this site into EPA. They absolutely hated coal and fossil fuel burning electricity sources. They were rooting for solar 100%. But this solar site was contaminating with sediment the river that they were getting paid, the river that they had dedicated their lives to protecting. So when those developers and those advocates, they see these types of headlines, it's really hard for them to take. They're really rooting for clean, renewable energy, but they don't want the environment destroyed in the meantime as those facilities are being developed. And so you can imagine the critics of solar energy, they kind of smile when they see these types of things. And, you know, we have a group here in Alabama, Friends of Coal. And, you know, I would imagine a friend of coal would absolutely love to bring these headlines up. So it hurts when solar sites look like this. And, you know, you guys know, anywhere we've got a large disturbance of soil, there's going to be a chance that that sediment's going to leave that site, particularly with the rainfall we have here. And many of the contractors that we have, at least here in the Southeast, and that's where all of my experience has been, is in the Southeastern United States. And it's a familiar story. A developer comes in from some state out west or up north, and they hire a contractor that's out of Southern California or somewhere in the desert. They've been doing solar work for years and years and years, and they show up in Alabama or Georgia or Mississippi, and things aren't the way they used to be. They're shocked by our topography not being flat, and by the amount of rainfall that we get down here, and it's troublesome to them, and it leads to trouble. And I've been, you know, for me, walking out on one of these sites, these investors they're asking me, hey Barry, is this really the way things happen down here in the Southeastern United States? Do we need to start adding into our investment calculations? Do we need to add in, hey, we might as well count on paying the regulator a fine when this is over with, and add in millions of dollars worth of cleanup and correction before we can really sell this site to the next person? And I tell them it doesn't have to be that way. You know, walking out onto some of these sites, for me personally, it's like stepping back 15 years in time to when we really weren't good at managing construction stormwater. And we don't have it all figured out today, but we're a heck of a lot better than what's represented on some of these sites. And so when you take a capable, competent, well-meaning contractor out of the desert, they bring with them desert techniques, and desert techniques don't work in Alabama or Ohio. And then when we get in trouble, when things start going awry, the things that they used to fix problems with, those don't work either. Those correction problems, they don't work either, because the ground's not flat, it doesn't soak up the water, and you've got a lot more water to deal with. So it's really, there's an educational process that has to come along with this, and that can be through specification, it can be through ordinance, but somehow you guys have to protect your interests when you have a facility move in. And we're going to talk about managing communication and managing work a little bit later. So those developers, you know, one of the hardest things that's for me is to watch money being wasted as I don't want to say incompetent, but folks that are incapable or haven't had the experience that we've had here. They're really trying, but they're just spinning their wheels. And the photo there on the right, I remember standing there saying, wow, there's a lot more water coming out of this area than I would have expected. And the contractor's rep, he said, yeah, I need to get that silt fence stood back up. And I said, no, please don't waste another dollar on silt fence to put in this conveyance. Let's address the water. Yeah, this ditch on the left there, this was probably the second or third time that the lining had been put back into this channel. And I would tell them every time, I'd say, look, get your designer to specify a channel lining that will hold up. I don't think this will hold up. And you know, with this particular photo, the superintendent said, no, we put these checks in between, and that's going to hold the small aggregate. Well, the next time it rained, all the aggregate was gone, and they had to do it again. I bet this one channel was probably reconstructed 4 times, and there's probably $10,000 or $15,000 worth of aggregate being lost every time. It's down in the sediment basin down below. So those investors, they're wanting to know, Barry, how do I reduce the risk of losing money, or how do I reduce the risk of being surprised? That's their biggest problem, is they've got this plan for making money, and then they're surprised with these additional costs, and they're looking for ways to reduce that risk. And so I've personally started looking at projects and stormwater management in a very different way now. I look at it not through a lens of compliance or water quality protection necessarily, but it's about risk. You know, most of the things that can sink us in construction are beyond our control. We don't get to control how hard it rains, how often it rains. We don't control the soils. We don't control how much area we have to work in, or our neighbors. So the best we can do is try to minimize those risks. And so as I walk through these risks, I know that not everyone on this call is in the solar world or will ever be in the solar world, and that's okay. I want you to think about these risks as they apply to your project. And whether it's transportation or residential or industrial, it doesn't matter. We all face these same kind of risk. And then I'll talk about how to minimize or mitigate those risks. And that will apply to your project also, regardless of where you work. So one of the easiest way to decide whether or not you're in compliance is if the water is leaving your project is orange, you are not in compliance, regulatory compliance. And if that water crosses a public road, somebody is going to see it, and you're about to spend some money. Environmental risk. I mentioned a lot of these developers have an environmental ethic, and it's up to us as stormwater professionals to let them know, hey, if we don't do something different here, we're going to destroy that wetland, or we're going to really impact that stream hard, or you don't want that on your conscience or on your brand. So let's take care of that. You know, if a community doesn't want you there to begin with, they're going to complain about just about anything negative that happens to them. This this is a county road, a dirt county road adjacent to one of the projects I worked on. And the local residents didn't like the fact that the sediment, the solar site was depositing sediment on their dirt road. Their clean dirt was getting dirty from the solar dirty dirt. And so not only was there a problem with sediment deposition, there was also some erosion in a few places. So they were already angry. They were made angrier. They went to the county engineer. The county engineer was angry because he had to deal with this. And eventually the solar company had to come up with some fixes for that road and do a better job of keeping sediment on their site. And of course, that can lead to legal problems if you're not satisfying the community's expectations. The Clean Water Act sets forth some provisions for citizens to sue using the Clean Water Act and all of its provisions and potential penalties. They can sue under provisions of the Clean Water Act if they don't think the state or federal regulators are doing their job. And so that's a real concern. And also if your sediment from your solar site lands on someone else's property, that's considered trespass. And you are liable for cleaning up your mess. And this, this sediment leaving the site went through a pasture, a utility easement into the woods, and all of those entities that were affected by that sediment, they had the right to sue. Fortunately, they didn't in this particular case. Then we've got operational and maintenance risk. The photo there in the upper right, if you've got so much sediment deposition underneath your panels that your trackers can't work, they can't function to track the sun properly, somebody's about to spend some money. If you can't get up and down the access roads within the site, or you're spending tens of thousands of dollars every year to replenish the aggregate that's been washed away, that's a cost that needs to be either mitigated or put into those early calculations, like the developers or the investors were saying. And then I also help our investors to figure out whether or not their contractor is going to sue them or file a claim against them. Contracts have provisions. Typically, if a contractor damages solar panels on the site, it's pretty clear in the contract that they have to pay for that. They have to pay to replace those. But it's a little bit less clear when a contractor isn't given the tools that they need, or like our example earlier, vegetation is removed from the contract. Who pays for those problems? Who's paying for this dozer and this long reach excavator to take care of this ton of sediment? Fortunately, it's in a sediment basin and not in the wetlands. But you hear what I'm saying. The contracts typically have provisions to when there's a problem, we keep moving, we keep progressing, we do the work, but the contractor can file a claim, they can put the owner on notice, and then we sort out those issues and who pays for what. We sort those things out in the end. That video is not supposed to keep playing, but anyway, so really those 5 areas of risk are what I look at. Are we going to get fined? Does this work reflect our mission and our values? Will we be sued? Can we get around on our site afterward? And then is our contractor going to give us problems in the end? And so the best way I've found to reduce all of those different types of risk, and this simplistic, holistic, fundamental approach to managing construction stormwater, it developed about before 15 years ago. I've been using these 5 pillars of construction stormwater management for about 15 years. They developed over several years of pain and misery and learning, and I've been sharing these with anybody that would listen. The Ohio DOT, when they published their new construction stormwater manual, it's going to be categorized using the 5 pillars of construction stormwater management. Same way with the Nebraska DOT and others who have adopted this approach to managing construction stormwater. And the approach kind of developed in a backward fashion. We saw our sediment in the pond, or sediment in the wetland, or sediment in places where it wasn't supposed to be, and we thought sediment was our problem. Well, sediment wasn't the problem. Sediment was a symptom of another problem or a different problem, set of problems. And so we started tracing that problem back to the slope where the sediment came from. And we learned pretty quickly that if we'll keep it up here, keep that soil particle up here, we don't have to work so hard to catch it down there. But there's something that's causing that particle to leave the slope, and it's water. And so we adopted a clean water in, clean water out approach, and we convey and we divert and we get that water around and over and under our work area as to the extent that we can. And then that reduces our workload to just the raindrops that fall on our site, rather than treating someone else's water, mixing our dirty water with it and then trying to get the dirt back out. It doesn't work that way. But we need somebody to help us with that. I don't operate bulldozers and track hose. I work for clients who hire people to do that. And it's those contractors that we need to realize just how capable and competent they are, and realize that if we will tell them up front what we want and we're willing to pay for it, they can do for us just about anything we ask them to. But we've got to tell them up front. We've got to share our priorities and our expectations and tell them exactly what we want to happen on this project and the way we want it to happen, or they're just headed out in their own direction using their own interests as their guide. And so by the way, I'm going to walk through these 5 pillars. I've created a fact sheet for these 5 pillars, and Teresa has a copy of that, and she's going to put in maybe in the chat box a link to that fact sheet, and also I think a link or the actual document may be posted on the website a little bit later. But if you have any questions about the 5 pillars, please give me a call. And again, as we walk through these, they're not only applicable in solar development, transportation, residential, industrial, whatever it is, at whatever stage of construction, we can apply these. So managing communication, that includes pre-bid meetings and pre-construction meetings. It also includes specification, contract documents, and plan notes, and really anything to convey the priorities and expectations of the people who write the check. That's what managing communication is. And managing work is, I mentioned the person who writes the check. I get pushback on this one because designers in particular say we can't dictate the means and methods of the contractor. Well, who says you can't dictate the means and methods of the contractor? You're writing the check. You know what's good for you. You got a contractor coming out of the desert to Ohio. You know a little bit more about managing construction stormwater in Ohio. So let's tell the contractor up front how we need this work to be done, and then expect that they do it. Of course, we're going to be willing to pay for it. It's in the contract. So this is staging and sequencing the project to delay and minimize both the area of disturbance and the duration of disturbance. It's simply promoting a continual pursuit of permanent vegetation or permanent stabilization. And it's not about erosion, it's about managing the work of the contractor. I know this photo isn't great. I had to zoom in so far on Google Earth that it got blurry, but what I'm trying to show is this is a stage of construction where posts are being driven, racking for the solar panels is being assembled, and you can't see a stick of grass anywhere on this photo, and it does not have to be that way. You can drive a post into grass, right? So just imagine, what if this were a cow pasture and it had established vegetation and your contractor needed to drive all these posts? Yes, some of that's going to be torn up, especially when they start putting in their underground cabling and utilities. But we're starting out with, we're delaying disturbance, we're limiting disturbance, and we're just putting ourselves in a much better place if we can preserve existing vegetation. And if we have to clear and grade, then let's establish vegetation before we start this type of operation. That's what managing work is about. Managing water is simply, as I said earlier, that's taking water over, around, under, However you can keep that water out of your work area, that's what we do. So we're addressing runoff from properties coming to us and through us. We're addressing runoff, the raindrops that land on our site. We're thinking about also thinking about dewatering effluent. And just remember that water is dumb. We get to tell it where to go and how fast to get there. And if we don't tell it where to go, it's going to go where gravity pulls it. And you're going to get a site that looks something like this if we're not intentional about where that water has to go. And this is, I'm actually helping an owner on this site. A site was sold to a new owner. This is what they received, and they started paying attention to how these major gullies on their site are affecting their maintenance operations. And many of these rows, I think we estimated about 400 rows, you can't drive from one end of the road to the other. So the mowers, they go down the row until they hit that big gully, and they either have to back out or turn around if they have room, come back out of the row and then go around and enter from the other side. Same way with solar panel washing, and it becomes about money. Again, it's about efficiency and maintenance and operational costs. And so anyway, that's managing water. You guys know managing erosion and managing sediment. It's managing erosion is about vegetation establishment and managing flow velocities. And so vegetation establishment and preservation should be at the top of everyone's mind the day we start clearing, and it should be there until we have a decent stand of vegetation. And so this slide is, this is where the product manufacturers and salespeople get angry with me. But I want to share with you over years and years of experience and intentional testing and observation and putting traditionally blown and crimped straw mulch against and beside more expensive hydraulic mulches, expensive ones and less expensive ones. Traditional mulch wins every time. And so I know that's hard for some to hear, and please let's talk about it, or if you want, send me hate mail if you want, but I wanted to share that experience. If we're talking about 1,000 acres and you can save a per acre cost, just know that traditional straw mulch blown at a decent thickness, 2 or 3 tons, 2 tons per acre, and then crimped adequately, that is going to work better. It's going to last longer than anything a regulator or a salesperson or anybody else is trying to sell you. So let the hate mail begin. So managing sediment, that's just about slowing water down. It's hanging on to water long enough for sediment particles to fall out. And if those particles are clay particles, you're going to have to hang on to it for a long time, or and add flocculant to it in some cases to get those particles to settle. If you have sandy soils, we just have to slow it down, preferably slow it down on our property or the property that we're working with, because that water will eventually slow down and it's going to deposit sediment, and you want that to be in a place where you can manage it and you're not going to get sued over it. So so again, remember these 5 pillars, they apply to any type of construction at any place and really at any stage of construction. When I'm brought into a site, and there's some sites that I look at on a monthly basis, and then even a few DOT sites that I look at on a weekly basis, and I'm running through these 5 pillars as I'm driving up on the project. Are we talking to one another? Is the contractor doing things in a sequence, in a phasing that benefits them, or are they doing things in a way that benefits the goals of this project? Managing water, do we have clean water coming to us and then we're letting it go where it wants across our work area and then have dirty water leaving, or are we protecting that water as it flows through the site? And then obviously erosion, are we getting to a permanent stand or stage of stabilization as quickly as possible? Is that on everyone's mind? We need to finish this right now. And then lastly, sediment, are we hanging on to the water long enough to get sediment to drop out of the remaining sediment? So those are the 5 pillars, and they're laid out in order of priority, should be priority in order of effectiveness and in order of economy. You know, it is much cheaper to host a pre-bid meeting and tell everybody up front before they throw their bids in, tell them exactly what's going on here. This is what a sediment basin looks like, and this is how we expect it to function, and this is what you're going to have to do, and this is what we expect. That's a whole lot cheaper than actually constructing the sediment basin on the back end. So, you know, John Maxwell, leadership author, he says that two of the greatest challenges of any organization is to get their employees to think and to do things in order of importance. And this, I feel like the 5 pillars has been thought through and vetted, and it's been successfully used for about 15 years, and it puts things in a correct order of importance. And so I did drop several slides this morning out of interest of time. I wanted us to have plenty of time to talk if you're interested and have questions. So let's do that now. And Teresa, I think you were going to monitor the chat and lay out any questions. And do we have any yet?
Yeah,
I think
we
there's a
definitely
few.
do. Yep. So I'll begin with the first one. So in your experience, who applies for the state construction permit? Is it typically the contractor or the solar company?
So with solar development, there'll be a solar developer who will get the design up to, say, a conceptual stage, or maybe 30%, and then they will take bids for where EPC contractors will bid on that, doing the rest of the design work and building the project. And EPC is engineering, procurement, and construction, I believe. And so the EPC contractor, they will have their own engineering design firm, and then they will do the work themselves and with subs. Typically, the permit is secured up front just to make sure it can be secured up front. We're talking about 1,000 to 13,000 acre site, so the regulators get nervous. So it's in the owner and developer's interest to go ahead and get that up front, and then they typically transfer that ownership or the permit coverage to the EPC contractor. Has been my experience. Good question.
How much impact do the solar panels have on a particular site in terms of changes to runoff coefficients or curve numbers? And is there a similar level of the development that these sites are similar to in terms of setting the post-construction calculations?
Yep. So today, solar panels are not fixed. So you might have in your head that a fixed solar panel, the raindrops are going to fall on it, run to one side, and then there's going to be this drip line where water concentrates and causes problems that way. Today, solar panels, they track with the sun. So in the morning, they're facing eastward, and as the day goes by, they flip to, or they rotate every couple of minutes to horizontal, and then at the end of the day, they're facing west. And so because of that, there's not a real defined drip line. So that's not a concern. And really, so that water, it hits the panel, rolls off one way or the other, lands in the grass, hopefully, and then runs off. And so I would argue that a runoff coefficient for a solar site would be very similar to a grass pasture with some access roads, of course. In that similar same topography or terrain, I think the runoff coefficient would be similar to a pasture, a grazing pasture.
We have some really good questions coming in, so thank you to everybody sending these in. We have another one about the grass seed that's used. So do you typically stick to grass seeding when replanting a site, or do you try to mix in native shrubs as well?
Yeah, so well, first there need to be a seed species mix that is appropriate for where the location, the geography, and the location within Ohio or wherever you might be. There also needs to be that mix needs to be appropriate for the season. So we in Alabama, it's hard for us to get Bermuda grass to establish if we plant it, say, after July. And so we really need to wait until next spring. And so we may choose a seed mix that holds the world together right now and through the winter. And we may put some unhulled Bermuda in there, some permanent seed that we hope will come back up in the spring. But we really have to be watching that to make sure that it actually does come back, and then we supplement that with some seeding, kind of seeding and stubble type processes. So let's see, so species types, you want a lower growing plant, of course. You need to be thinking about fire. You need to be thinking about maintenance. Here in the Southeast, it's Bermuda grass and fescues and Bahia grass typically. I don't know what those appropriate seed mixes would be for you guys, but just be thinking about maintenance and I guess clearance underneath the panel. You don't want your grass getting up in the wiring and everything underneath the panel, even, and take into account as it rotates at its most extreme rotated position. So I hope that helps. I'm not I tell you what, I would consult an agronomist or somewhere there in your area, wherever your area may be, and just make sure that you've got your goals, and then a good agronomist can help you meet those goals with recommendations for seed mix. Thank you.
Yeah, great. If you're still good on time, we've got a few other really good questions. So with your experience, whether positive or negative, using sheep to graze around the solar panels, is that been a good experience, or, in I guess inverse, in lieu of mowing, have you had any experience with using sheep?
Yeah, that was actually one of the slides that I pulled out. I have not personally had that experience. I know that our neighbor next door in Georgia, there are several examples of farming agricultural operations going on underneath the solar panels. When I talked to, I talked to one just a few days ago. I talked with one of my solar contacts, and I just brought up that concept, and he said, yeah, you need to get your panel up high enough that, of course, sheep and goats don't jump up on top of the panel, but also you don't want them eating your wiring. You're going to have a different layout than what he had as far as protecting the wiring. But I think it kind of answers that question of, my dad's question or problem with taking it out of agricultural production. But I've found that with my dad, at least, when I bring this up or show him images like that, he finds another reason to not like solar.
Yeah, because that was another question that came in too, as far as, is it possible to farm in the rows in between for things such as like hay or grain?
Yeah, another potential, I guess, multi-use of these sites is planting pollinators. I've seen several initiatives to put pollinator plants inside the solar facilities. Of course, you've got to plan for that, plan for what it looks like, and also plan for the things that eat the things that like pollinators. So birds and that sort of thing could become a problem, I think.
For my delay. So how do solar fields impact stormwater calculations in the sense of curve numbers and peak discharges?
Yeah, I think I answered part of that earlier. I really don't think if you model this like a pasture, then fine. But know that where you actually had another slide where I was going to talk about some of that. So where we have low areas, just know that you've got a large acreage of water coming to one spot, and it's going to concentrate. And so we need to make sure that we have an intentional conveyance. We need to know that our channel lining is appropriate for the anticipated flows in there. And we need to make sure that channel lining that we select is also appropriate for the type of maintenance that's going to be going on there. So these channels are perpendicular to or parallel with a row, but Oftentimes you have to go perpendicular, and you need to make sure that maintenance equipment can get from one side to the other. Also on that note, most solar sites have sediment basins installed, and in several instances I've seen as a part of the design, those sediment basins were to be filled in or bulldozed or otherwise taken out at the end of construction. And I think that's a really bad idea. If you can leave the sediment base, even if it's a temporary, designed as a temporary sediment basin, as long as your spillway is big enough to handle the flows that you need to handle, the floating skimmers can clog, they can break off. That's okay. The baffles can degrade and go away. And what's going to happen is that pond is eventually going to turn into a wetland of sorts with cattails and wetland plants and fill up with sediment ultimately, but that's sediment that's not in the receiving water downstream. So incorporating, typically detention isn't an issue, but leaving, I guess, for water quantity, but water quality is an issue even after the site's regulatorily compliant. Water quality is still an issue, or can be.
Great. This one's interesting. I wouldn't have really given much consideration to this, but I think it's a great question. So have you run into any issues with fire that may come from dried vegetation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have, on one site, we did have an instance where an employee, we were doing some erosion sediment control correction, and an employee who was in a side-by-side pulling behind him a hay straw blower, he got in contact with some of maybe a combiner box at the end of the row, and that sparked and created a fire that he wasn't aware of until his vehicle and that trailer were on fire. And instead of jumping out and getting help, he decided he would drive himself to help. So he dragged that fire around the field until he had to get out of that vehicle. But there are emergency plans and contacts and all of that. I was actually with the maintenance guy at lunch when he got the call, and he immediately made sure that the fire department had been contacted and the plans were working and in place. So yeah, that is a concern where we have dry grass underneath the panels, but they try their best to prevent that.
I think we'll do one more question, and then there's several others that have come in, and I've been keeping tabs on them. So we'll be sure to follow up afterwards if your question didn't get answered. But with the final question, are solar farms typically do they typically hold an NPDES permit, or do they have their own separating permit like an oil, gas, or logging permit?
Yeah, so most solar farms are out in rural areas, so they're not really impacted they're not inside of an MS4 boundary. They could be, but typically not. They're not owned by a governmental entity, so even if they are in those urban areas, they're not regulated by MS4. After construction is over, there's no longer a construction discharge permit associated with them. Now, some of the equipment out there does have oil within it, and I'm sure the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, I'm sure that there are some requirements and permitting associated with it, just a site that generates power in general. But as far as water quality goes, I'm not aware of any other requirements beyond construction, stormwater management, and MS4, if that. There probably could be local requirements and ordinances, depending on where you are, but generally no, there are no other water related permits associated with the solar site.
I know Ohio EPA has a fact sheet that's available. So if anybody is interested in looking at that fact sheet, we can include that in the correspondence that goes out after this webinar as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to have Barry's contact information in there as well and get a follow-up to some of these questions. I think we're reaching the end of our time frame. Let me get to,
So Dave, as you're getting your slides up, I do want to say thank you for everyone that joined us today. I appreciate your interest in getting better at managing stormwater. That's kind of my mission, is to help good people get better at managing stormwater. Thank you to the Ohio Stormwater Association for your leadership and your forethought on this particular topic. I think it says and shows a lot about your organization. And I guess lastly, like Dave said, my contact information is out there. If you ever think that I can personally help you, or if Volker can help you with feasibility or planning or design or permitting compliance, getting out of a pickle that you might be into, even permitting beyond environmental permitting, we do a lot of that for energy companies and others. So however I can help you, I'd love to have that opportunity. So please just give me a call, connect with me on LinkedIn, however you want to contact me. I'd love to help. But thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Dave. Thank you for setting this up, and I appreciate this opportunity.
yeah, thank you, Barry. I do want to recognize our sponsors. If you are interested in sponsorship, we have various partner levels to do that. You can contact, we've got some information there at the bottom on contacting the president or some of our outreach members as well. Get involved with OSWA. You know, this is the kind of content that we offer, and we have that available to you if you're a member. So join us and get involved with the committees. Let's see, what else do we have? I think upcoming OSWA events, be ready for next year's webinar series. I'm sure, coming up with a list of topics and dates for next year's events, as well as the Ohio Stormwater Conference. Once again, hope to see you there, Barry. That'll be in May. Put it on your calendar. And again, thanks again to Barry Fagan for his presentation today. I hope you all learned something and have some information and good contacts to make after this. Also want to recognize Dana. Thank you. I forgot to mention about signing up for your names on the chat so we can follow you. I appreciate that in the chat box as well. We will be sending out certificates shortly for those that are registered through the website, so expect those shortly. And with that, I think I will say Happy Veterans Day. Support our vets and fly a flag today, and we'll talk to you the next time. Thanks again. So long, everybody.